I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever?
One life,
forever,
one love,
and ever.
one soul.
Today's February 5th, 2020. I'm Brent Nally, and I'm really excited to have a special guest today, Zoltan Istvan. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And Zoltan is currently running for President of the United States of America 2020. And I want to let Zoltan just kind of introduce himself and share what's top of mind. I know you've been traveling a lot. You were just in Iowa recently. So obviously I'll give you a proper introduction in a minute, but I'd love for you to share what's top of mind right now and what you want to talk about.
Sure. Well, I was just, in the Iowa caucuses, and that was very interesting because, you're kind of in the mix. There's a couple central hotels. And if you're, for example, in the bar at 8 p.m. at night, it's got to be 500 journalists and a bunch of different candidates and their supporters. So it's really kind of a fun, almost circus-like event. And then I did the caucuses and spoke. I'm running as a Republican, so it's not as competitive as I say the Democrats, because obviously Trump is going to win the Republican nomination. But I had a great time. I'm now back in California just for about 2 days, and then I'm heading back to New Hampshire where there's voting on the 11th of February, and I'm going to be on the state ballot there.
Awesome. So before maybe I lose my longevity-focused audience too much, let's give you a proper introduction and tie all this into how what you're doing is actually really important, in my opinion, and obviously your opinion, to have radical life extension for all of humans. So first of all, Zoltan has a philosophy and religion degree from Columbia University, and Zoltan is the author of numerous books, and Zoltan is also the founder of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. And Zoltan also, has been on mainstream media many years, including being a journalist himself. I saw you quite a bit in the 2015 and 2016 election cycle on lots of mainstream media. And I think I first saw you on Joe Rogan back in 2015, because I've been a big fan of Joe Rogan for years. I'll put in the show notes below for everybody so they can check out that link. I think it's still a great interview to check out. So there's other things that we can discuss, but real quick, I think that what's really important is that not only the work that scientists are doing to advance longevity so that we can all live healthier, longer lives, but it's also really important that people get educated about this, and that our politics and our governments get educated about this. So Zoltan's doing incredible work there. I'll have links to all of his books in the show notes below. You can get them all on Amazon. I'll have links to his social media so you can follow Zoltan. But anything else that you wanted to share to tie this in together right now, Zoltan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of people ask, what would I do my very first day in office? And I have a very singular thing that I would do. I would declare aging a disease. In my opinion, if the national government was to do something like declare aging a disease, all of a sudden the entire culture of America could change overnight, as people think for the very first time, wait a sec, longevity and overcoming biological death is really the key of what this gentleman is talking about, who's now running the country. And so I think that literally be probably the very first thing I would do, because I think we have a culture in America that's, very religious oriented, wants to see the afterlife, whereas I'm like, no. What we really need to do is to make it so that we can live dramatically longer here. And unless we actually declare aging a disease from the government's point of view, the National Institute of Health and a lot of other different kind of nonprofits and universities, whatever, will never get the kind of funding that we need to overcome aging. So I just wanted to put that in for your audience, that's the first thing I would do on day one.
That's incredible. That's something that I talk about a lot. And some people get too caught up, I think, in the semantics about aging being a disease. And if it's the first time people heard that, they might think that it's ageist or something, but it's actually quite the opposite. This is a compassionate thing for the elderly. And aging clearly is a disease in the sense that it's driving all of these age-related diseases that happen to people in older age. The data is very clear on that. So one thing I like to say in all my videos is that about 150,000 people die every single day, according to the world government best statistics we can get. And out of those 150,000, about 110,000 of those are aging or age-related diseases, deaths. So this is what's killing the most people on the planet. This is something that should be on the radar for the Pentagon, for every single institution that cares about protecting humans, which is what governments are supposed to do. So this is just simple to me. We just need the education, and I'm so honored to be talking with you right now and let you, share your platform. So maybe we can jump into other things of the Zoltan Istvan 2020 platform. What are the main policies that you would hope to enact if you became president?
Well, I'd say the main policy that I'm trying to do is to argue that China is literally starting to eat the lunch of America. And partially because they're sort of a secular nation. They don't have some of these conservative hangups that our administration has. So they really move forward in terms of genetic editing and artificial intelligence, and they could accept these things as part of their upcoming future. But I think the main thing to understand really with that is that unless America starts to drive innovation again, we're going to have an authoritarian nation, communist nation essentially, but even though it's quasi-communism at this point, but still it's authoritarian, leading the world in science and technology. And I think that's very sad for the West to have lost that opportunity to be the leader after so many centuries essentially. So one of the things about my presidential campaign is really to try to restart or reignite innovation in America. And that means taking a lot of government support and potentially funding and certainly tax relief and just driving that money into companies, to organizations, to universities that are working on all sorts of radical science and technology. And of course, the umbrella term for this is transhumanism, which most people know me for. Transhumanism is really the idea of just merging people with machines or using radical science and technology to upgrade the human body. It doesn't need to be necessarily merging machines. It can just be anything that's radical science and technology. And well, that does very well in Silicon Valley. You go to the middle of the country like Iowa, no one's heard about it. Everyone's like, what? However, if we can't get the rest of America on board with this kind of movement towards longevity and transhumanism, we're just going to get beaten by China. And that means they're going to be calling the shots. And you already have to realize that we're an underdog against China. Even though we might be a little bit bigger than them now, that could change in the next 3 or 4 years. They will soon have 5 times the population. We need to bring back innovation to America in a way that can overcome the rest of kind of the world, that we're like, wow, America's leading us again in these radical ideas. And that can mean anything from cloning, it can be anything from stem cells and adding brand new limbs. It can be anything from, exoskeleton technology that makes a 100-year-old person be able to climb Mount Everest. But whatever it is, it's almost always anti-aging technologies, and it's almost always transhumanist technologies. And we need more of that in America, because while Silicon Valley does a great job carrying us, it can't carry the entire country against China, which has literally almost 5 times the population.
Definitely. And just a quick thought I had in my head, what kind of technologies or health exciting things have you done personally that you've seen improve your life? Transhumanist type things.
So, I think there's a lot of public figures in the longevity movement, but I'm probably one of the youngest ones. So it's funny because unlike Kurzweil or some of the other people, I don't take a ton of pills. I don't, do that much because I go jogging every day or I go swimming every day. And I sometimes I take nootropics, and I have a chip implant in my hand. I can open my front door and start cars and whatever and stuff like that. But basically, a lot of the radical technologies that are going to be coming are still a little bit out there, or, you have them if you're disabled. For example, you lost a limb in a war zone. But bottom line is like, I'm just waiting for a lot of it, trying to promote a lot of it and trying to get a lot more money into the company's hands and the organization's hands that are trying to develop this stuff. And I think what's really interesting is not so much what we're doing today, but just what's just a few years around the corner, the FDA approving a couple different pills that'll be, perhaps anti-aging pills. And also, when you look at the different industries of how anti-aging is progressing, you have either stem cell treatments, you have genetic editing and, reversing how our genes work and telomerase and things like that. Then you have robotic organs or bionic organs. And then you might have 3D printed organs. And then you even have the sci-fi stuff, which I love discussing, the uploading your consciousness to live indefinitely. But whatever it is, it's all the way across the spectrum. And everybody And I guess every different type of scientist that's working on the anti-aging technologies is still going the same direction. We're not sure what's going to win in 30 or 40 or 50 years or in the next 10 years, but it's important to fund all of them just to be safe.
Very well said. And I think that basic income is a general platform that you have as well. Can you maybe share what that means to you?
Sure. I mean, a lot of people have become aware of basic income because of Andrew Yang running for the Democrats, and he has a platform of this his freedom dividend, which raises taxes in order to pay everybody $1,000. Well, when I was running in 2016 for the Transhumanist Party as their presidential nominee, we decided to support a basic income way back then. And we think a basic income is really, really important because at some point, automation is going to take jobs and maybe all the jobs. And robots will just simply be better at humans for doing basically almost everything except maybe art. But the new basic income that I have that I've been working out for quite a long time now is called the federal land dividend. And 50% of the 11 most western states of the US are empty federal land. And so my policy as a Republican would take that land, monetize it by leasing it out to big business, who would then pay a dividend back to every single American. What's really interesting is President Trump is already doing this. He is taking this land. The only difference is that he's giving it to big business and they're not paying you and I. They're just paying themselves, getting wealthier for big business. Whereas I want to take some of that land and pay you and me. And if you take all the federal land together, it's worth approximately $150 to $200 trillion. And if you divide $150 trillion by 325 million Americans, every single American in the United States would have $500,000 of equity based on that federal land, those federal resources. So you ask yourself, well, why are 50% of Americans, they can't even come up with a few $100s for a flat tire? And the answer is because we haven't used our natural resources properly to make everybody live a better life and have money for health insurance, have money for education, have money for college, and the things that they might want to. We're holding these federal lands, something like 800 million acres, just basically for future generations, thousands of years from now. But, as most longevity activists would know, and most transhumanists would know, the human species probably won't survive more than another 2 or 3 generations because we're going to merge with machines, become robots, leave the planet, AI, the singularity, all these other things. So holding this federal land for thousands of years doesn't make sense anymore. Not when the microprocessor is almost exponentially growing every 18 or 24 months. And then we have quantum computing on the horizon. We're entering the AI and the true transhumanist age. We ought to use those resources right now. There are 13 million people just alone in California living at the poverty line. We have millions of homeless people. So I want to use the federal land of America to pay every single American a dividend. And that's how my basic income works, my universal basic income.
All right. So you basically want to give me and other Americans money and potentially extend our health span and lifespan. So I'll jump on board for that.
Absolutely. And I actually think that, for example, even like I'm a Republican, so I'm supposed to be more fiscally conservative, and I usually am, but I think that there'd be plenty enough money because when you actually take this $150 to $200 trillion of land, and when you work out, if let's say you give out 85% of the land, you can monetize it. And we don't touch any national parks. My plan doesn't touch any national parks. Most of this federal land is empty federal land. I mean, it's just nobody's even doing anything on it at all. Now, if you just take 85% of that, you should be able to give $1,700 a month to every single American. And that's a 90-year-old American and a 6-month-old American. So we're talking families of 4 having somewhat of $70,000, $80,000 income, totally dramatically changing, and not raising taxes to do it. But my plan would also probably provide, if I could get Congress to pass this, some type of catastrophic health insurance. Now, I wouldn't be providing health insurance for every American, but I would be providing catastrophic health insurance. And that tends to be one of the big things that really worry people and that bankrupt so many Americans. So if you have something terrible happen to you and you have to go in the ambulance and you're all torn apart from a terrible car accident, that could help. Or if you have terrible cancer that's life-threatening, this catastrophic insurance could help. This might not be for the flu shot. This might not be for the common cold, this type of insurance. That would be up to you to take care of. But this federal land dividend could provide so many different types of basic necessities that America needs that we fight over all the time. Oh, should we have a private insurance? Should we not have, this could provide something in the middle. And then everyone could say, well, yeah, I can afford health insurance now because I'm only paying for it for for something else, not the major things that ruin lives, that take away homes, that make people go bankrupt. So, the federal land dividend is a really good idea. Why aren't we using those resources instead of watching people that get cancer then go through medical bankruptcy and lose their home and then end up on the streets? It's a sad thing. We ought to use our resources.
Definitely. And it's a sad reality that medical issues are the number one reason for bankruptcy in America. So that's something that we should just change from a purely compassionate standpoint. Okay, so I'd love to pivot real quick and just kind of plug your books. So your most recent book is The Anti-Deathist: Writings of a Radical Longevity Activist, which just came out January 3rd, 2020. And you're a prolific writer. You're writing for the Huffington Post, and you also have I think you have published 2 books last year. Why don't we real briefly just run through your books and your writings and give a quick synopsis of them so folks can see what they might want to purchase and read?
Sure. Well, so most people know me, and this is sort of how my public career in transhumanism launched, is when I wrote The Transhumanist Wager. And The Transhumanist Wager is a fictional novel about a man who wants to live forever and would do anything to achieve that. Now, that means including starting world war. So it's a very controversial book, not necessarily my personal philosophies, all of it, but it's a really interesting story that takes place of a man who's essentially agnostic or maybe even non-religious, and he is fighting a very Christian nation that is saying living indefinitely is a sin. We should die to go meet God. And that's the premise of how this book unfolds. And we really, in the life extension world, sort of do fight this sometimes. I mean, if you ask any single person in Congress right now, do you believe in an afterlife? I believe 100% of them will answer yes right now. And that means that when we talk about getting congressional funding for, let's say, life extension technologies or living indefinitely or overcoming aging, it's nowhere to be found because they're like, well, we don't want to stop aging. Why would we stop aging? That's the natural course of, action. But in my book, this man, his name's Jethro Knights, the protagonist takes on this entire environment and says, wait a sec, that's not the natural thing. There's nothing natural about dying. There's nothing, in fact, natural about being here on planet Earth. What's natural is what I can do with my hands, what I can change in the world, and how I can make myself not have to die and become non-existent. And the book unfolds that way. And it's become kind of one of the classics of the longevity movement and sort of, been compared to a lot of other sci-fi books of one person who defines a new moral system, because the moral system asks, how far would you go to live indefinitely? And as I mentioned in this book, it ends up being sort of the transhumanists against the rest of the world. And they say, look, we're going to go as far as we need to go in order to live indefinitely. Now, again, it's just a novel, but it's done very well. So I'd suggest if you want to be introduced to my work, that's interesting. But the other 3 books I put out, so over the last 6 years, I've written about 230 opinion essays. In fact, in the last year, I had a lot of great luck. 3 of my opinion essays came out in the New York Times opinion section, so those were great. And through the I guess those 6 years, I've had columns at the Huffington Post, at Vice, Psychology Today, and of course, I've written for Gizmodo and so many other places, Slate and Salon, and all, across the board, really. And a lot of those essays have now been adapted into 3 different nonfiction books. So these are all nonfiction books where you can read my essays, oftentimes tweaked to be fitting in the book. But, the very first one is, the last one is the one on life extension. And then we have another one called The Futurist Cure, which is my best futurist essays. And then we have the one that I'm really working on, or I guess pushing forth in my campaign, which is Upgrading America. It's the political essays of Zoltan Istvan. But all those, I guess any book oftentimes has whatever your subject materials will have those essays that are directed towards that. And of course, the life extension, the latest one out is really all about life extension. It covers everything from using genetic editing to treat anti-aging, issues, to cryonics, to what is the religious environment that's, kind of trying to control anti-aging techniques and whatnot, and all the way just to even spiritual ideas. We have this crazy idea in transhumanism called quantum archaeology, this idea that we might at some point be able to bio 3D print human beings back to existence. And I don't mean just through like taking a DNA sample of them and printing a clone. I mean through this idea where you would use AI to reverse engineer certain parts of molecular structures to get back even into your memories to figure out exactly what that person was thinking at a certain point, and then be able to 3D bioprint out that brain, which would then think a conscious entity would be like, oh, here I was not realizing that that person had actually died maybe 100 years ago. Now, this stuff is still science fiction, the quantum archaeology stuff, but in 100 years with quantum computing and the singularity, it might not be anymore. So, longevity isn't just like, how do we get ourselves to live to 120? Longevity in some places is not even overcoming death. It's eliminating, it's almost making death obsolete in itself. Yes, you can die, but we can bring you right back. And then you can die again. And of course, people ask me, like, who would you bring back right away? And this is a very interesting question. If you could bring back anyone, I'd said, hey, and I've written some controversial articles, I'd bring back Jesus just to ask him questions. I'm not a Christian, but wouldn't that be interesting to 3D bioprint Jesus? And what happens is all the Christian transhumanists then came out and said, well, maybe it's actually this 3D quantum archaeology technology that Jesus will use to do the second coming. And then you have this kind of bridge between transhumanism, secular transhumanism, and futuristic Christian thinking. But the point is that the book covers a lot of these wild subjects, and a lot of people have never been introduced to some of the more science fiction ideas of longevity, soulmate stuff, weird spirituality stuff. And anyways, I mentioned it just because I've seen, the videos you've been doing, you're interviewing some amazing people, but some of the crazy stuff I think of really goes like, what does longevity mean to live 10,000 years in the future? What's it like?
Very fascinating. Thanks for watching some of my videos. I appreciate it. I love science fiction. I probably watched a lot more science fiction than I have read personally, but very fascinating ideas that I think about. And you can just go down a rabbit hole or a wormhole with this info, which I'm sure you've done more than almost anybody. So real briefly, I'm just personally curious. I've actually become friends with Gennady Stolarov and Johanan Ben Zion. I met them in person at RadFest October last year. And obviously you're the founder of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. So share with the audience a little bit about why you decided to run as a Republican for this year. And also I'm really curious, what's it like running for president? I mean, where do you get the funding? Where do you get the energy? It's an incredible amount of work and an incredible undertaking. So yeah, just your thoughts on those ideas.
Absolutely. And, I'm running for Republican now, but just your listeners know and viewers, I ran as in 2018 for governor of California as a libertarian. And in 2016, I ran for the Transhumanist Party as their nominee. And frankly, there's a possibility in 2024 or 2028, I'll run as a Democrat. I'm really not beholden to political parties. I'm beholden to spreading transhumanism and life extension through the major branches and kind of institutions of government that are out there. So, for me, it's really about going out there and saying something novel that gets other politicians and the public to kind of think of politics in terms of the scientific method, and especially in terms of anti-aging technology and anti-aging philosophy. How can we get to a point when humans live a lot longer? What happens when death is not a part of the social equation? Do we get married? Do we have kids? All these other things that can, other really fascinating questions. But, Gennady is a friend of mine, and I formed the Transhumanist Party back in 2014. And then after running as its nominee, I handed the party to him after my campaign ended. And it was a broadly successful campaign in the sense that we took a giant coffin bus across the country, a bus about 40 feet that looked like a big coffin, and drove it across the United States and delivered a Transhumanist Bill of Rights to the U.S. Capitol building. Of course, one of the major initiatives of that was to declare aging a disease. And Gennady has now taken over the Transhumanist Party. They have a new candidate, Ben Zion, who's running in 2020. And, I'm excited that political party continues. It takes a lot. I mean, for example, the Libertarian Party has existed for 50 years. It's America's third largest party, and it still doesn't have full state ballot access. Maybe it did in 2016 because of Gary Johnson, and he had some money, but it's incredibly difficult to get ballot access. So the Transhumanist Party has, as far as I know, zero ballot access. And that makes it very difficult to actually win the presidency. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running as a Republican right now, is because, in order to challenge Trump, it's one thing to challenge Trump. It's another thing to actually legitimately or legally be able to be nominated. And so I've had to go out and get on the ballot. So, for example, we're on the California state ballot as a Republican. I just saw my ballot came in the mail today, so you can vote for me. And we're on a number of other major ballots. We'll be on the New Hampshire ballot on November 11th in just 5-6 days when the voting begins. Iowa didn't have a ballot because it's a caucus. But the point is, the Transhumanist Party is this great vehicle for getting out political ideas with science in mind, but it's really only the Democrats and the Republicans, sadly, that control the real political environment. If you want to win, you pretty much have to be on one of those sides. And that's kind of why even the Libertarians have nobody in congressional office or no senators at a federal level, or no governors either.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thanks for sharing those details. So maybe the other part of the question is, what's it like campaigning? I mean, how much are you just putting in, like 12, 14, 16-hour days? Because this is, a full-time job. I know that you're running to win. So, the travel schedule has got to be crazy and everything. How do you get funding for that?
Well, it's a big bummer because it is, in a sense, it is totally time consuming. And I have 2 kids, a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, 2 daughters, and my wife and my mom who lives with me. It's just the whole thing's overwhelming. You're really never ever home. In terms of funding, we take donations. We haven't received that many donations. So if your viewers want to put forward $5, $10, $100, whatever, please do so. We have a website.
We'll have a link. We'll have a link in the show notes below. I'll get the link.
It's Zoltan2020.com. But, I had the luck of, in my 30s, starting a real estate business that I sold, did pretty well, and it enabled me to kind of not have to work again. And so that has funded pretty much most things I want to do, including the ability to write originally my novel, The Transhumanist Wager, which sort of did so well that it launched a public career. And you can't make a living as a freelance journalist anymore, basically. So I'm able to just kind of dedicate all my time, full time, now, to transhumanism, to the advocacy of life extension, without having to worry about finances, basically at all. And so that's been a huge thing. And so that's why I'm able to do this without actually having to work, because I can tell you it's such a commitment and there's no money to be made in this. So you just really are trying to influence people. And my main goal is really to get the world to think about transhumanism and life extension. And if they think about it, maybe one day we'll get some congressional people that actually like it, and then they'll pass funding. And all of a sudden, instead of having, a few $1 billion budget at the NIH, we'll have a $500 billion budget. And all of a sudden, look, behold, in 5 years, we cured cancer, or, we cured Alzheimer's. These are things that can happen. Curing cancer is not a matter of, is it possible? Curing cancer is a matter of money. It's a very singular problem. It's always going to be a matter of money. We will be able to tamper enough with the human being and the human body to fix everything in it that's wrong. But it just takes resources. And as long as we continue to spend all our resources buying trinkets at Walmart or fighting far off wars, I mean, the biggest platform I have in my presidential campaign is I want to dramatically reduce the military, take that money, and instead of having a military complex, create a scientific industrial complex, a science industrial complex. By doing so, we could have Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all these companies be dedicating to technologies that would be upgrading the human being and upgrading the, hopefully overcoming the aging process, and still make a ton of money. I'm not trying to kill American capitalism. I love capitalism. I just think we could have Boeing and Lockheed Martin and the defense companies doing things for the human being. Instead of fighting wars in far off lands, let's fight a war against cancer. Let's fight a war against diabetes. Let's fight a war against aging. And that's where I think our military funding should really be going. And so these are radical ideas. And yet on the surface, you're like a presidential candidate who cares about the longevity and the overall health of its citizens. This is a really good thing. This is the best thing that's actually, a president could really do for somebody. And so, that's my platform.
You say they're radical, and I know what you mean because they are, but there's just, to me, it's just common sense once you understand the data. So, my mission is actually very similar to yours. I have a lot of my money tied up in cryptocurrency, and I'm also a Tesla investor. I don't diversify much. I try to go with these really great investment theses that I have, but I'm focusing every day, to bring sustainable energy to the planet and to extend people's health span and lifespan as much as possible. And I love what you said, because it's what I tell my audience as well, too. It's not really about when is this going to happen. It's about what can you do to make it happen faster. As long as some kind of natural crazy disaster like asteroid doesn't destroy this human race, we're just going to keep making more progress. The question is, how much progress do we make, and in what?
And let me tell your audience a classic quote that I always say: if we can cure aging by the year 2030 versus the year 2050, we will save 1 billion lives from dying. That's 1 billion lives, based on your quote earlier, 150,000 people dying a day. So this is the greatest humanitarian quest that has ever happened to our species. Put our resources, put our money into overcoming aging, because we will save 1 billion lives. This isn't just a few thousand lives. This isn't just even 10,000 lives. We're talking about saving 1 billion lives by putting the Earth's resources and our finances by making a transhumanist wager. This is really what the Transhumanist Wager, my novel, is about. It's about making this idea that it's the most important quest in my life is to overcome aging. After that, we can worry about everything else, or, kids, or, trinkets at Walmart, or whatever it is we want, surfing, sports, whatever. But first, we must concentrate on overcoming death, because nothing else really matters after that. And the point of the story, though, is that if we could dedicate so many more resources to it, we could get there by 2030 versus 2050. And we're going to look back at 2050 if we don't get there by 2030 and say, wow, that billion people that died, it's almost on our hands. We got blood on our hands because we didn't realize the severity of the situation. And I try to tell people, transhumanism is the most humanitarian quest that's out there. We want to save lives.
Beautiful. I completely agree. So, Zoltan, we only have just a few minutes left. I want to respect your time. So at the end, I want to give you an opportunity to plug, your social media. Actually, let's do that now. So in the show notes below, definitely follow Zoltan on social media. I'll have all the links there. If you can and you feel so willing, I'd highly encourage you to donate so we can continue to get this message out. Ties into what we've been talking about. If we can get this message out to more and more people, get you on more mainstream media outlets, and get people really thinking that this is possible. That's the work that I'm really trying to do by interviewing these scientists. I was just at the Longevity Therapeutics Conference last week in San Francisco. My goodness, this brilliant minds that are there and the things that they're coming up with and the venture capital that's coming in. This is happening, and it's happening fast. I don't want to get too excited, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but there's some really exciting things happening. So let's leave it at this, Zoltan. What is kind of the most exciting things, companies, or therapies that you're most excited about for longevity?
Well, unfortunately, my father died about 3 years ago now through cardiovascular disease. And, I'd say the number one killer in the world, as everybody knows, is pretty much cardiovascular disease, having a heart attack. And about 25% or maybe a little bit more people will die from that. So I'm really excited by some of the progress in bionic organs, specifically bionic hearts. And probably because I might have a bad heart myself if it runs genetically. So I'm really excited that there are companies here in Silicon Valley that are working on replacing your organs from flesh. This may not sound right, and maybe I'll lose, some of your viewers say, oh, he's gone too far. But look, I'm not a fan of biology. I think biology is designed on a very, from a very philosophical level, quite frail. It's designed to die. It's sort of a ticking time bomb. Unless we can somehow rejuvenate all our cells continually and stay age 40 or age 30 forever, and maybe we will through genetic editing or stem cell treatments or whatever. But until we can do that, there's no question that our biology is a ticking time bomb. So I also like the idea of, surfing giant waves or running marathons, but that could all be accomplished by organs that or bionic. And of course, a lot of people die from organ failure. It's essentially what happens. And if we could get a machines inside ourselves, as weird as that sounds, who doesn't want to have a bionic heart that beats much more strongly than the greatest Olympians? And I really look forward to this era when we can start, electively putting in and replacing our organs with bionics in terms of things that will allow us to do things we never could have done before. And of course, as I always say, if you have an artificial heart, you might be able to turn it down with your phone. So when you want to sleep, you can meditate. If you want to have crazy sex, you can turn it up and have crazy sex. If you want to hold your breath and surf giant waves, you can do that same thing. But there's all these different ways to make the human body better in terms of living longer as well, by upgrading ourselves. And so it's really one of the big mantras that I have, is that it's not just becoming a perfect biological species, it's actually overcoming our biology altogether, because I just can't, whatever metal it is, titanium, or whatever they're going to come up with in the future, it's just going to be more sophisticated to be using code and whatever bionics we have out there as we move towards this synthetic entity, synthetic species. And I'm all for that, even if it means sort of losing a bit of our humanness. I don't think we're going to lose our empathy and our kindness and our mammalianness. I think we're always going to be that species that loves one another. But I look forward to a day when we don't have to worry about our heart beating its last beat, because from birth, it was kind of a ticking time bomb to have a certain amount of beats. I want something that can, like a car, be fixed and fixed and fixed for 1 million years if possible.
Beautiful. It's definitely something to aspire to, and I have the same aspirations. So Zoltan, we're near the end here. I would love for you to share, your final thoughts, and let's keep it to the campaign right now. Let's focus on that, because I really want to plug that and plug you. We've said social media, people can follow you there, but maybe final thoughts about the campaign.
Sure. Well, please go to social media and retweet me and reshare me and do all these things. Look, I'm not a big Trump basher, and I'm not a big giant Republican fan either. I'm not any of these things. I'm not like hate or love or whatever. I'm just somebody who's trying to get into the political arena and really shout out to the Trump administration. Hey, cutting the NIH's budget doesn't help anybody. In fact, if you want to really keep up against China, you're going to have to increase budgets so that we can spend more money on healthcare and more money on fighting disease and more money on overcoming aging and becoming America again, that creates all these radical innovations. And that requires not only a president that's up for that, but an administration that's willing to push that down kind of through Congress, so that all of a sudden everybody says, you know what, we really need to innovate again to get America having jobs and America more prosperous and things like that. So that's really my kind of main general message. But if you're in New Hampshire and I'm there February 11th, you can vote for me. Later on Super Tuesday, I'll be in California and Oklahoma and Colorado and Texas. So, you can vote for me a lot of different places. And if nothing else, I'm not pretending I'm going to win or anything like that, because obviously I'm not. But I will hopefully make a difference. We're doing a lot of interviews a day. The bigger the campaign gets, the better it'll be. If we could start breaking into major media every single day, then that's going to be fantastic, because all of a sudden everyone's going to start hearing about life extension and transhumanism. And they hear it enough, pretty soon they say it's normal, and then they demand it. And when the people demand life extension, then the politicians will listen and start putting money to the scientists' hands, and the scientists will come up for the cures that will all make us live indefinitely. And all of a sudden, we've kind of achieved what we want to achieve. So that's my message. Vote for me. And if you can't vote for me, spread my message on social media, and let's just try to get this out there and get some kind of force behind it. I think with enough of a kind of a nerve, enough of a vibe, we can get the American people thinking that transhumanism and life extension is something very normal and also the destiny of our country.
Very well stated. One thing that I tell my audience all the time is that politicians these days globally, not just in the US, they're really not leaders, they're followers. They're following the data of what the people are demanding. So people ultimately do have the power. They just need to realize they have the power, and they need to be educated about what's actually possible. So I can't thank you enough, for doing this interview and for working on your mission, which is so much in alignment with my subscribers' mission. And I don't want to have the final words. So final thoughts from you.
Hey, just thank you so much for having me. And hopefully your audience will Google me tonight and find out some more information. I've written a ton of essays. And hey, thank you for having me. And, let's all live longer.
Awesome. Thanks, Zoltan. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Forever young, I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever?
One life,
forever
one love,
and ever.
one soul.
Hampshire.